Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I am Sarah Ann Minkin, Director of Programs and Partnerships at the Foundation. Today is February 27th, 2024, and I am delighted to be here with Rania Batrice, one of FMEP's 2024 Palestinian Non-Resident Fellows. Rania is an activist and strategist for progressive change, a public relations specialist, and a political consultant. This is our first official podcast together with Rania as our new fellow, and I am so glad that you are here, Rania. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start by asking you to please tell us about yourself. Where are you from? What do you want listeners to know about you as a political strategist, as an activist, as a coalition builder? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you again. So I am first generation Palestinian. My parents immigrated to the US, to Texas, actually, where I'm still based. It's an interesting place to be for sure. But, my parents immigrated here to give my brothers and I a better life, theoretically. And I think I get asked quite a bit why it is I do the work that I do. And the short answer is because I'm Palestinian. I grew up understanding very clearly, even before I had the vocabulary for it, just what it meant to be Palestinian. And as we know today, just given everything that we're facing, it's so front and center. It's not new. Nothing that's happening now is new, but the curtain has kind of been pulled back, are the things that Palestinian people have been contending with for decades and decades, nearly a century. And so, so much of the work that I do, it might seem disjointed when you look at it on paper. If you kind of look at it side by side, it's like what you're doing political work and policy work and advocacy and coalition building, and it all might seem very disjointed. And the issues themselves, I mean, I do a lot of work around a lot of different issue areas. And the fact of the matter is, to me, they all intersect at the point of justice. And that's just the reality. And so I know we're going to have lots of conversations, and this is going to be a great interview, and folks will learn more about me as we go along. But at the end of the day, the thing that I want people to take away is that everything I do is in a pursuit of justice and equity for all people, my people included.
Thank you for that. So in the pursuit of justice and equity, will you tell us a little bit in a concrete way about the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did things for years, like manage campaigns and was in the comm space and a lot of policy creation. And really, there were a few times in my career where I swore off politics forever and ever, and I was never going back ever again. And that didn't last, obviously. But in those times, I worked within advocacy and coalition building and in nonprofits specifically. And I really fell in love with that work. And I still love that work. And it's very, very important to me. So as I was getting pulled back into the political space, I felt the pull on the other side too, to really go back um, to the advocacy and coalition building work. And I was told over and over and over that I needed to pick. I had to choose. I had to pick what I was going to do. I couldn't do both. And so I often joke that the fastest way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't do it. So here we are. In March, it'll be 24 years doing this work, and it's very stressful and really wild most days, but I do both. I do political work and I do advocacy work, and sometimes it is bringing policy forward into coalitions and advocacy spaces that it's policy that's really great. It already exists. We just really need to give it a boost. Sometimes it is policy we want to see. It doesn't exist, so that sort of coalition might come together to push members to bring specific policy forward. Sometimes it is electoral work. Oftentimes, obviously, we hear the saying all the time, it matters who sits in the seats. We're seeing that truer than ever these days. It does matter who sits in those elected seats. And also sometimes it's just helping people sort of get their vision off the ground. So some of my work includes, for example, gun violence prevention. And unfortunately, um, it's very wildly prevalent in our country. And so oftentimes survivor families might reach out to me to help them get a foundation off the ground in the name of a loved one who was killed, or sometimes it's things like event production. I mean, it really just varies. It depends on what the needs are, um, uh, and how I can best be of service and plug in. So it is, like I said, if you look at it on paper, it all seems very all over the place and a little bit disjointed. But again, all of the work, whether it's in climate, whether it's in literal justice reform or Palestinian liberation, it always comes back to the justice and equity piece, and how can we, in a very holistic way, achieve the changes that we need. So from a electoral perspective, again, ensuring that we're electing the right people. From a policy perspective, making sure we're putting good policy forward. And then advocacy and coalition building sometimes is just a must to push people in the right direction. I sometimes tell a not a very funny joke, but a joke that rarely do politicians wake up deciding they're going to make the right decision. We have to force them. And there's exceptions, obviously. Of course, there are really fantastic people who are truly serving the people. But unfortunately, I feel like that's the exception and not the norm within the halls of Congress and even the White House.
Especially at this moment.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for all of that. Will you tell us a little bit specifically about your work around Palestinian liberation and what that looks like?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's been ongoing. In my sort of earlier days, it was about trying to help people see the intersection of our cause of Palestinian liberation and self-determination. There's so many groups and individuals that I work with that can see themselves in our struggle. I do a lot of reparations work with the Black community. There's a direct through line between that struggle and our struggle. I've done a lot of land back work with Indigenous communities, as well as things like, protecting Indigenous lands and land back again specifically, but very obvious through line there with our struggle and that struggle as well. It's so, I say in the early days that was a really big focus. It still is. It still is today, and we're actually seeing the fruits of that labor that so many have been working on for so long. I mean, there's just so many incredible people who've been in this space for so long, and we're seeing it kind of come front and center in a bigger way than I think I've ever seen in my lifetime, where people are not only seeing themselves in the struggle, they're actually coming together to lift their voices and stand, quite frankly, in front of us in some ways, in front of us as Palestinians, as people who see us as human beings and are utilizing their platforms and their voices to make sure everybody that they're connected to are seeing the same things. And so that has been ongoing work for, like I said, for a couple decades now. I mean, really my whole life. I was born Palestinian. So, and then part of it too is what I was saying about just being humanized, being seen as human beings. I feel like that is a big part of my work too, is storytelling. It is not an accident. And doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we see it happen to so many different communities where they are, I mean, dehumanized. That's the only way I can say it. And it's really, it's such a complicated thing to unwind when you again have been for decades and decades been painted with a certain brush, and there's just decades of propaganda and lots of money behind selling that narrative of who we are and what kind of people we are and our right to exist or not exist and all of these kinds of things. So it's part of my work also is bringing forward the stories of all of us. I mean, people like me and my family and other families just like ours that live in people's communities. And I sometimes say, one of my friends always calls me Palestinian undercover. That's not, everybody doesn't know right away if you just look at me that I'm Palestinian, but I am 100%. And so oftentimes people will say things in front of me not knowing that I'm Palestinian, and it's disgusting, quite frankly. And so I feel like part of my unofficial work too is sometimes I will let people go and say the horrible, awful things they say, and then say, hey, by the way, I'm Palestinian. Like, you're talking about me, you're talking about my family, you're talking about, you work with me, and I'm not quiet about being Palestinian, but oftentimes people like to ignore or forget that.
Wow, what experiences you must have had across such and with such a variety in your career and all of the different people you've worked with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question specifically about Palestine now. I want to ask you if you can talk about what you think this moment in time or this moment in history means for Palestinians or for Palestine. Is there a way to describe where we are right now?
It's it's difficult only because it's so emotional. And like I said before, none of this is new. None of the settler violence in the West Bank is not new. The control over movement, I mean, every bit of movement is not new. And I often tell the story about, I mean, myself, my own experience. I still have tons of family there. And every time I travel back home to see them, I get detained and I'm told that my American passport doesn't matter there. And when I am traveling like between the West Bank and the rest of the country, I always get stopped. It's always an ordeal. And I'm an American citizen. So imagine being Palestinian and not an American citizen. Although, of course, sorry to digress a bit, but we're seeing again and again American Palestinians being killed there and nothing, zero response from the administration or from anybody. I mean, from this White House that very specifically said, if you come after Americans, we will respond. Unless you're Palestinian American, then it doesn't count. Again, sorry to digress, but that's just kind of the reality we've always existed in, and it does feel emotional in a way because it's like we've been sort of jumping up and down and screaming and just trying to be seen and heard for so long, and it feels like it's finally happening, but after what? Uh, and it's one of these situations where I honestly, I'll speak for myself. I have to kind of grab a hold of myself and understand that this is the most disgusting, atrocious thing that we're watching genocide unfold in front of our very eyes, being paid for and facilitated and excused by our own government, funded by our own tax dollars. All these things are true. And at the same time, we are watching it happen in real time on our phones, on our computers. It cannot be ignored. So we're seeing voices come into this space now who, I mean, some of them have been with us forever and God love them. But we're seeing these new voices come into the space and these new allies come into the space who weren't necessarily aware before. So there's a part of me, if I'm being just very honest, and I promise I check myself as often as I can, there's a part of me that's frustrated because it's not new and it's just like, oh my gosh, we've been trying to tell you this for so long. And then the other part of me that's like, whatever, we just have to move. We have to take, we can't let all the lives that have been taken, all the people who have been killed, be for nothing. I mean, I hate to even say it that way, but as frustrating as it might be, it just doesn't matter. We're in this moment right now, and we have to utilize it to ensure that people continue to talk about it, continue to make moves to end the suffering that, again, is not new. It's decades and decades old, and to ensure that we're moving toward a just peace, truly, not this Frankenstein's monster that Netanyahu is talking about, like a continuation of occupation and apartheid, but real, true, just peace for everybody.
Thank you for laying that out so clearly and so clearly, so accessibly. There's a a sort of political slogan that you're never late for justice.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's true or not, but I know that I'm hearing in what you said, I'm hearing you wrestle with it in some way. Also, this idea that this has been going on for so long. Where have you been to the people who are
Yeah.
arriving now? And also, there's a kind of, okay, you're here. Let's move forward.
Yeah,
There's no time to waste. And I
exactly.
hear you
Yeah.
saying both of those things so clearly and moving
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
this just peace. Um,
Yeah. No, it's exactly right. And it is one of those situations that I'm a believer in allowing ourselves to feel everything we need to feel. And I try to give myself that grace too of, allowing myself to feel frustrated and also not getting stuck in it. Because the fact of the matter is it doesn't help anyone to sit in frustration and not do everything possible to move forward. I mean, it's literally life and death and the future of the Palestinian state and Palestinian people.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for all of that. So I want to, so here you are, you've described this moment where we are, that it couldn't be more urgent of a time, or higher stakes. And you said yes when FMEP asked you to be a fellow with us this year, which means that lucky us, we're going to get to work with you to host conversations, webinars, podcasts, your vision for the urgent and necessary public conversations right now. That's what we get to do on this channel together. And so I want to ask you, what do you most want the Foundation for Middle East Peace, FMEP, what do you most want our audiences to know or to think about or to be challenged by?
Uh, we are, and I know, we want to stay within all of the compliance things, but we are in an election year. And so without going into anything specifically partisan, I would like really just love to impress upon everybody to do your homework. And I don't just mean in the traditional ways of know what people say, of course, understand what people stand for and what what they're all about and all of those things, but also understand that we live in a time where uh, propaganda runs rampant. It's not new, but it is, I feel like there's a lot more money behind it and it's a lot more prevalent. And so as you're taking in content, whether it's social media or commercials or whatever it is, do some digging and understand who's behind it. What is their motivation? What are they trying to get you to do, believe, etc.? So that's one thing. The other thing too is there is a very obvious desperation for all of us to talk about anything else other than Gaza, other than Palestine, other than Palestinians. There's a desperate attempt to turn the page, to change the subject, to get us to just talk about anything else. And my hope is that we're able to continue this conversation and bringing it to the forefront of people's minds, and also to understand how this situation impacts every one of us. There's a tendency in this country. I always say nobody in the United States really cares about foreign policy until something happens, and then it's like a blip on the radar, and then everybody moves on. Um, I personally care a lot about foreign policy, and so that's not the place I necessarily exist. But I also can absolutely appreciate people are busy. They have families and jobs and kids and, all the things that are going on. And so it's very easy to sort of unplug and say, this doesn't impact me. This is not about me. And the reality is, it is about you. It's about all of us. So when our government is telling us we can't afford healthcare as a human right for every person in this country, when our government is telling us we can't afford to address climate change, when they're telling us we can't afford to give reparations to people that have been harmed and continue to be harmed by this country. They tell us all these things. We can't address child poverty. It's too expensive in this country. Yet they're going to send billions and billions and trillions of dollars to drop bombs on children. It rings hollow. And I do think it's really important. And it's obviously not just right this moment, but we're in this moment now, so I'm going to talk about it. But this is an ongoing situation with this country where we can't do anything for people here, but we are paying for settlers in the West Bank to have healthcare and education and to move and to live on occupied land. And we are paying, like, no, don't get confused. Anybody out there listening, we are paying for that. We are paying for that while our government's telling us we can't have those same things here.
So you're asking everyone to pay attention, do
Yes.
their homework. We're
Please.
in an election
Yes.
year.
Yeah.
I want to note that today, Tuesday, the 27th, is the Michigan primary.
Yes.
Could you just tell our audience for a second what is happening in Michigan right now with Gaza, with Palestine, with Palestinians?
Absolutely. So there's a very large Arab and Muslim population in Michigan, very, very active and historically democratic constituency. And there's obviously a lot of not just frustration, heartache, pain, people who have lost dozens and dozens, some hundred or more family members who live in Michigan. And the expectation has been, and in fact, the president has even said it out loud, that everybody's going to forget come November. And my answer to him and to the administration is go speak to a person in Michigan who has lost 30 or 60 or 100 family members, and they're going to have some choice words for you. Understandably. I mean, this is not what we're witnessing, what's happening, the loss, it is massive and is touching everybody. And so there is this attempt, this campaign, a coordinated effort within Michigan. Just like you said, today is the primary. There is a lot of states don't have this, but Michigan does, where they actually, on the Democratic ballot, there is a line for uncommitted. You can vote uncommitted in the Democratic primary. And there are many different ways to send a message to the White House. This is one of them. And I'm very proud to have worked alongside some of the folks in Michigan who are working on this effort. And it's incredibly important because while we can see this administration getting scared, they're unfortunately not doing much more than providing lip service. In fact, I'm not even going to say much more. All they're doing is giving us lip service. They are saying the things. They're leaking stories. President Biden is talking about, yesterday, I'm sure you saw, as he's eating ice cream, he's talking about the ceasefire agreement that may or may not be in place by Monday. And we all know what that actually means. It's not a permanent ceasefire. And we know because Netanyahu and his entire administration have told us. They've told us exactly what they're doing. They've said genocide. They've used genocidal language. They've called this the next Nakba. And so we are in this dire situation where the person who is singularly positioned to stop this suffering is the president of our country and refusing to do anything substantive. And that is what voting uncommitted is all about in Michigan. And so I'm hopeful. There's really been so many people on the ground working hard to spread the word and send the message that this is a very important form of protest, quite frankly.
Thank you for that explanation, and for demonstrating so clearly what this moment is, and also why it's so important to us at FMEP to have you and have your voice and the work that you're doing and what you think is important and urgent, and to bring that to our audiences. I know that in a few days from now, we're going to have hopefully another first podcast with you that's going to dig deeper into the politics. You referenced before that people should do their homework. I just want to say that we had a webinar with you, I think it was last year, where we talked about the sort of masking of Israel-aligned PACs in Democratic primaries.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into those issues, but there is a lot of money coming from Israel-aligned organizations, specifically AIPAC-affiliated PACs, that are pushing an agenda that is much broader than anything that has to do with Israel and in the Democratic primary. So you're going to interpret, translate, unpack all of this for our audience and bring it to people's attention and help us learn and grow as engaged people in this country and in the world. What is really going on here, you're going to help us understand. And I am so grateful to you for all of this, and so grateful to you for making time for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm grateful for you and the entire FMEP team, and just we're in a dire place in the world and in our country, and I think these conversations are really important. So thank you for giving me space for them.
Thank you. And this is just the beginning. We're going to have you now. We're going to have you for a year, and we wanted to introduce you to our audience, which we are now doing in the process of. And so to everyone who is listening, thank you for tuning into this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Please make sure to check out our website, www.fmep.org, for resources related to what Rania has been talking about, for our other podcasts and webinars, for lots of other rich content related to Palestine and to Israel. Make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast so you can stay up to date. We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Spotify. And you can watch video versions of our podcasts, including this one, on YouTube. And with that, I am Sarah Ann Minkin, signing off until our next episode. Thank you so much.